Busy time in Tallahassee, parental consent, E-Verify, and more. The investigation into the Florida Coalition Against Parental Violence, the parental consent bill, the Florida Legislature passing a bill that will require parental consent for minors to have an abortion. Mary Anna, it's one that already many say is going to go straight to the Florida Supreme Court, and many argue that this is really just one word used or one phrase, Trojan horse, to get it in front of a newly conservative Florida Supreme Court.
I think this bill is absolutely ridiculous. The reality is the Florida Legislature passed a very similar bill in 1979, and in 1989 the Florida Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional. And the reality is that saying what a woman can do with her body and the privacy of her body is not something the government needs to meddle in at any age.
Different court now, though.
That's the problem. This is a very slippery slope, and we are opening ourselves up to a lot of problems that could take place.
The flip side, of course, the Republican-led legislature hearing from their constituents who say quite the opposite, Brian. It's going to be an issue that's going to resonate for a long time.
I always like to push back gently on, the woman thing, because a lot of the people who support this bill are women, and a lot of people in the legislature who support this bill are women. So, not all women agree on the abortion issue.
There's been some Republican women that have come out and ardently opposed this bill and voted against it.
And some Democrats as well on the flip side of that.
Absolutely, yes. Well, I mean,
who voted for.
Yes.
It's one of those issues that I wish wasn't in government.
Absolutely.
You approach it from different ways about the kind of the vote, but you both agree that.
Well, all I'm saying is 100% of women don't all agree on this particular issue or any of the issues around abortion. So it's sometimes
But the government doesn't need to be in my uterus or in the minor's uterus, who probably or may find themselves in a situation where they can't go to their parents.
Well, the counter argument to that, which I'm just offering it up for viewers to hear, the counter argument to that is that there's no other surgery or medical procedure you can have as a minor that you don't require parental consent.
Which is exactly
yes, but here's the problem.
And I'm just offering that up.
The problem with this is that if this becomes an issue where a minor winds up pregnant and goes to her family and says, I need to have consent to have an abortion, and I am underage, and the family believes in something, whether it is the church, whether it is another denomination, and says, no, you cannot, then you are telling a girl that she has to have a child that she doesn't want. What happens to that child? Does that child end up in the care of the state? What happens next? And these are the questions that we are not asking. And as Republicans, to have a conversation about a piece of legislation like this, they are saying that we are pro-life, and that is fantastic. But if you are going to be pro-life, you need to be pro-life all the way to the end of that person's life. And I think that we're not having those discussions, and that is the problem.
Well, I think we all know that this bill has little to do with parental consent and more, as you were noting, to try to push the whole issue of abortion all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. A lot of the states are passing bills they really hope will get to the U.S. Supreme Court for a new decision on Roe v. Wade.
Florida Supreme Court on up to the nation's high court. I want to ask you, Brian, from your many years, and thank you both for your perspective, longtime veteran up in Tallahassee. And right now, very interesting to me that there's a huge debate going on now. They've issued subpoenas to 13 people in a nonprofit salary scandal going on right now. They're the former associates of the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, a state-funded organization under fire for paying its former CEO, get this at home, more than $7.5 million over 3 years. We don't know where this is going to end up going, but again, you have a Republican-led legislature. There's a lot of local programs that we'd like to get a little piece of that money, and yet where were the people, the watchdogs on this kind of stuff? We don't know where it'll go, but you've seen things similar to this in your time. Your take?
Since the arrival of Jeb Bush in the governor's mansion, there has been this rush to privatize. The Republicans in the era of Jeb Bush, and continuing somewhat to today, believe that government can't handle much of anything, and we give it to private enterprise. And over and over and over again, we find private enterprises that take advantage, don't do a good job, sometimes spend the money in ways that they shouldn't, and the government oversight is not there. And it's really worth noting that in this particular case, the only reason that the government is involved now in checking this out is because of an 18-month investigation by the Miami Herald and the St. Pete Times.
Exactly.
So, and this is the kind of obscure agency that nobody really pays a lot of attention to, and this is what local journalism and journalism in Florida
clearly
is all
legislators
about.
didn't.
So this is your taxpayer dollars being, questionably used. And thank God there were some newspapers willing to look into it. 18 months.
Let's talk about E-Verify. Of course, a Florida issue, but one with national ramifications. Given the president's take on immigration, it'll be a chief issue for him. The E-Verify bill still moving along. opinion columns pro and con. Talk about that both as an issue for Floridians, but also as an issue as it will impact the discussion surrounding the presidential campaign. It interweaves in both ways, Mary Anna.
Look, Republican Democrats, they can both agree that illegal immigration is a problem. With E-Verify, the issue is now having these employers to have federal background checks to make sure that they're not illegally hiring people. Florida's current unemployment rate is 3%, which means that everybody that wants a job has a job, and that becomes a problem. And there's this slippery slope again with having employers do this. But the reality is when we're holding accountable to the illegal immigrants, this becomes supply and demand. If these people did not have jobs to come to, they wouldn't come to our country to get them.
Brian, an answer to that question, but also to back up just a bit, Governor Ron DeSantis, it really seems in this session, whether it's parental consent, E-Verify and the like, really putting his philosophical stamp. Not that Republicans didn't necessarily agree with him before, but it feels to me like a lot of things coalescing under somebody whose popularity sky high, said these are the things I want, and has coalesced the legislature around him. Fair critique?
Yeah, I mean, I think he has surprised some Democrats on, whether it's E-Verify, the environment, schools. I think he has surprised some Democrats on some of the more moderate positions he's taken.
On environment particularly.
And I think on E-Verify, I mean, I find it sort of hysterical that the people that are fighting the E-Verify the most are Republican supporters of Republican candidates, particularly the business community. The Florida Chamber of Commerce is opposing it. One of the most powerful lobbies in Tallahassee, the Associated Industries, is opposing E-Verify. So I don't want to hear you on the one hand preaching anti-immigration stuff and we got to stop these people, blah, 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 and then you're opposing E-Verify. That's silly. It's nonsense. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
We will have to leave it there, and we'll have your closing comments from both of you in a moment.